Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are discussing Anthropoid, a movie that came out in 2016. It was directed by Sean Ellis and written by Sean Ellis and Anthony Sherwood. It's a historical drama about Operation Anthropoid. It's about the assassination of Nazi official Reinhard Heydrich by Czechoslovak soldiers in May 1942. What did you think of this movie?
I really enjoyed this movie. I thought that particularly the parts after the assassination were really tense and gripping, and I thought the acting performances were really strong. And overall, I enjoyed my watch. I would definitely, recommend it for somebody looking for some sort of, a historical drama that's a bit thrillery.
Yeah, I agree. I also really enjoyed this movie, and I needed to enjoy a movie because we watched a couple recently that I did not enjoy so much. So it was good to find one that was good. And I also felt, as I was watching, it felt like it was accurate. I didn't know much about it beforehand, but just as I was watching, everything seemed like subtle and interesting, and not a lot seemed made up to me, and it turns out that it wasn't. Good movie. And also, Cillian Murphy just never disappoints for me.
Absolutely. I feel like for a little while there, we were on a Brad Pitt World War II movie kick, and now we're on a Cillian Murphy World War II movie kick. Who knows where we'll go next?
I promise we're not doing it on purpose, guys.
Just turns out that way.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a little bit of background about what was going on in Czechoslovakia at the time, because it helps the movie make a bit more sense. Czechoslovakia emerged from the ruins of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after World War I. As the Great Depression devastated the continent in the 1930s, political forces in the ethnically German part of the country, called the Sudeten, were conspiring with the Nazis to join Germany. Churchill wanted Britain to make a commitment to intervene on Czechoslovakia's behalf should Czechoslovakia be attacked, but Chamberlain disagreed. This was in the period where the Brits were following the strategy of appeasing Hitler. And so in 1938, some of the powers got together, notably to the exclusion of Czechoslovakia. They weren't even allowed in the room when this decision was being made. And they formed the Munich Agreement. And essentially, Czechoslovakia had to cede the Sudetenland to Germany. And if they did that, then Germany promised that they were not going to attack the remainder of the country. Now, if you know anything about Adolf Hitler, on March 15th, 1939, Germany invaded the rest of the country.
I mean, spoiler alert, sounds.
Yes. So a Nazi official named Reinhard Heydrich was put in charge of Czechoslovakia. It was no longer called that. It became sort of a protectorate of Germany. And he established the Jewish ghetto. He liquidated his opposition. Though this was not public knowledge really at the time, the ultimate goal was for the whole area to be completely German, not just the Sudeten. And he went about this by ruthlessly suppressing Czech culture. He ultimately planned to deport or exterminate much of the Czech population. Our main characters in the film left Czechoslovakia at the outbreak of the war and joined Czechoslovak units that had formed in Poland. And they later ended up fleeing to Britain after the Battle of France was lost. And then when they returned to Czechoslovakia for their final mission, they were operating on orders by the Czechoslovak government in exile, but they were trained as paratroops by the British, probably the SOE. But as we've discussed before, the SOE is the Special Operations Executive. That's the sort of covert spy aspect of the British political apparatus at the time.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the refresher about Czechoslovakia, which is really confusing. We were talking about this before because we're so used to not being Czechoslovakia anymore, but it was at the time.
Yes, exactly. I keep wanting to say Czech, but it should be Czechoslovak for sure.
So the final mission of the characters in this film is Operation Anthropoid, which brings us to the movie. Let's get into the plot. we open with a couple of opening cards, which are interspersed with some historical film clips. It says, in September 1938, a conference is held in Munich between Adolf Hitler and the leaders of France, Italy, and Great Britain. Hitler threatens war unless the neighboring country of Czechoslovakia is given to Germany. Facing Germany with no allies, Czechoslovakia is forced to stand down her armies, and Germany occupies the country without a shot being fired. A year later, Hitler invades Poland, and the world is once again at war. The Czechoslovak factories are seen as extremely important to the German war effort, but output is hindered by resistance to German rule. Hitler sends in his third in command to crush any resistance to the Nazi regime. His name is Reinhard Heydrich. His ruthless methods earn him another name, the Butcher of Prague, based on true events.
Yeah, some other nicknames for Reinhard Heydrich were the Hangman, the Blonde Beast, Himmler's evil genius, the young evil god of death, and then Hitler's personal nickname for him was the Man with the Iron Heart. So, you're pretty fucking intense for a Nazi if the other Nazis think that you're extra.
Yeah, and also the Man with the Iron Heart is also a name of a movie similarly about this mission, except that one is based on a fictional novel and this one is based on history. So, interesting.
Yeah. In the opening scene, Jan Kubish, played by Jamie Dornan, is in the woods at night. He's frantically hiding his parachute, trying to bury it in the snow. He hears a sound, and he follows it and finds a fellow parachutist, Joseph Gabchik, played by Cillian Murphy, who has injured his foot in the jump. The two are exiled Czechoslovak soldiers who have re-entered Czechoslovakia with a mission.
In a tense scene, the two parachutists must kill two possible collaborators in the woods. We also see Jan actually struggle to shoot someone in this bit. It's important in the movie. It's not based on real life. He had no trouble shooting people. They eventually make their way to Prague and locate what remains of the Czech resistance, the Yinda. Two key figures are Ladislav Vaniak, played by Marcin Dorkins, and Anko Hajski, played by Toby Jones, who interrogate the parachutists to ensure they are not Gestapo infiltrators. We learn that Jan and Josef have an important and likely suicidal mission to assassinate Reichsinspector Reinhard Heydrich.
Yeah, so at this point, the Czech resistance has been really brutally beaten down by Heydrich. The Gestapo were pretty good at infiltrating them and getting rid of their opponents. And it's very clear from this scene that the other members of the resistance are extremely wary about this idea of trying to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich. They're like, look, if we take him out, the Nazis are going to come down on us like a ton of bricks. It's not just going to be the resistance. Like, a lot of Czechs are going to die. And it's easy for London to give those orders when they are not here. And our two main characters are like, yeah, but that's our mission. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to give it a try.
Yeah. And you also notice they say something about we're the only ones left. So, like you said, the resistance has already thinned out quite a bit. And Jan seems a little bit unsure, but Josef seems really kind of set on completing the mission. So there's a little divide between those two as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that is their age difference. I think in real life they were of a similar age, but in the movie they made Josef older. And so he seems to be a bit more hardened, maybe, ready to carry out this mission at all costs. Whereas Jan, the younger one, is, he doesn't want to die. He wants to carry out this mission. He still believes that they'll get the chance to go home.
Yeah, and in the movie, you don't really get a sense, or at least you don't really know that they fought before. You can't really tell that they're battle-hardened at this point, but they are.
Yes, I believe both of them fought in the Battle of France in real life.
Yes.
At the safe house where they're staying, we're introduced to our two main female characters in the movie. The parachutists meet Marie Kovarnikova, played by Charlotte Lebrun, and through her Lenka Favkova, played by Anna Geislerova. These are based on real people, but the names appear to have been changed for the movie. The two women participate in the resistance by providing cover for the men and helping to do recon. So it's if the men are out walking alone, the Gestapo are going to stop them and try and find out whether or not it worked. But if they're walking with women, it's less suspicious, and they can pretend that they're taking photos of them when really they're taking recon photos and that whole kind of thing. The women can keep watch while they're having secret meetings, that kind of stuff. Jan and Marie are immediately taken with one another, whereas Josef and Lenka are the older, more cautious parallel to their young love.
It also seems to me like it's not specifically mentioned, but Prague is pretty much completely occupied at this point as well. So there's Gestapo and German soldiers on every street corner, basically. So they really have to be careful. The men are almost caught at a planning meeting, but they have a narrow escape. They talk about Heydrich's route to work, trying to work out when he will be arriving and whether he will be traveling with an armed guard. They determine that they will have their best shot at a particular point in the route where his car must slow down to turn a corner. The women learn the true nature of what the men are planning, but both agree to continue to help.
Yes, we sort of see parallels between the men where Marie, who's the younger one, like Jan, she is very worried about this being successful, about what's going to happen to them afterwards, about what's going to happen to everyone afterwards. Whereas Lenka, like Josef, is, she's a bit more wise to the ways of the world. She's fought before too. She's been part of the resistance before. And she's like, you could have just told us, we would have been able to help you.
I loved Josef quite a lot, actually. She was probably my favorite. That wasn't Cillian Murphy. So.
Yeah, you know what? It is nice to see because it's Cillian Murphy, so I would understand if there was a temptation to cast him opposite a younger actress, the way they do in a lot of these movies. But They let him act opposite someone his own age, and I felt like her being a little bit older really changed the dynamic and made her super interesting. So,
yep.
The group learns that Heydrich is soon to be transferred to Paris. He's getting a new posting. This obviously is not optimal because their original plan is they're going to wait and they're going to watch him every day and they're going to wait for a day when he comes to work, not with an armed guard. And well, now if he's being transferred to Paris, that really cuts down on the amount of days that they can wait. So they decide they only have one chance to assassinate him. They're going to do it the following morning. And the group of men turns up the following day. There's a sort of a little group of conspirators. It's these two parachutists and it's some members of the Czech resistance. And everyone turns up except for Karl Čerda, played by Jiří Stimac. But they don't have any time to wait for him, so they prepare the ambush. It's May 27th, 1942. Luckily for them, Heydrich just happens to not be traveling with an armed guard today. In real life, he used to drive around Prague all the time in an open-topped car because he wanted to show off how strong the German government was in the area. So it was really him just being arrogant. And unluckily for the conspirators, however, when Josef steps out into the road, his gun jams. And earlier in the movie, Lenka had made a comment about how Josef should clean his gun because he's dirty. And Sten guns were known to jam if they were dirty. So I think these two scenes are sort of supposed to inform each other. But Sten guns also often had other issues because they were manufactured really quickly and cheaply. They were a popular gun that was given to resistance fighters. I think we touched on this when we talked about Allied. And the Sten was designed for convenience, and it actually used the same ammunition as an MP40, which was a German submachine gun. So if I'm a resistance fighter and I have a Sten gun, then it's really easy for me to get more ammunition if I need it. I don't have to wait for the Allies to airdrop me more ammunition or whatever the case is. However, the Sten gun loaded horizontally rather than vertically like the MP40. And so what would happen is sometimes the magazine wouldn't feed correctly, and that would cause the gun to jam. So Jan has to come to the rescue because his gun is jammed. He throws a homemade grenade that hits the vehicle that Heydrich is traveling in. It fatally wounds him. The conspirators, of course, don't know that he's fatally wounded because he's still up and walking around. And so they have to flee.
It's funny you mentioned Allied because I was just going to make a reference to my favorite not spy movie. I don't know, a Sten gun, it seems pretty small to carry, so they could kind of easily conceal it. And they make it seem in the scene as though Josef is struggling for a second to put it together, and that kind of makes him feel guilty later on about the gun jamming. But I don't know, it was a very tense scene, this assassination scene.
Yeah, the time when the gun had jammed, and they do this thing too where it's sort of, you can hear people or you can see that people are yelling, but they've sort of turned the sound down. It's like he's going through this moment in slow motion and it feels very long while he's struggling with the gun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this scene. And I also enjoyed the moment when they were still planning, when they were trying to figure out when he was traveling with an armed guard. And they were like saying, we figured out when he's leaving and when he's arriving, but we cannot find any pattern in when he has an armed guard or not. So I thought this was just really, you were kind of waiting to see, oh my God, is there going to be an on-guard? And then they kind of filmed it to be, there was like a bus in front of them, so you couldn't see initially if there was an on-guard or not. So they filmed it really like exciting and tense.
Yeah, it was great. And, in real life too, and this also happens in the movie, Heydrich's driver wanted to drive away because that's the smart thing to do if you've been ambushed and you don't know how many guys are trying to kill you and you are just a couple of guys. But Heydrich, with his arrogance, he decided that no, he wanted to stop and confront the man who had tried to shoot him. And of course, this ultimately ended up resulting in his death. So
the Nazis come down hard on the population, as you would expect. It's like retaliation. We learn that they have completely destroyed the village of Lidis. All men in the village over the age of 15 were killed, and most of the women and children were sent to concentration camps, where many were gassed or executed. Lenka is also killed in the reprisals.
In real life, the village of Lejavsky was also razed, and all the adults were killed. And the real Lenka, whose real name was Liboslava Favkova, was executed at Mauthausen, and her sister and parents were also part of the resistance and also executed.
Rough, man.
The scene in the movie where Marie, Jan's girlfriend, is telling Josef, the Cillian Murphy character, that Lenka has been killed, there's like sort of a fast cut to the Germans are rounding up civilians, and so Lenka runs, and there's just like a clip of her running, and you can like see it in her face that she knows that like this is probably the end of the line. And to me, that was just so much more of an impactful shot than the shot we see a few seconds later where it's sort of a close-up on her face and it's clear that she's been killed. Just that shot of her running and like the look of resignation on her face, like that was that was really gutting. Like I thought that was really well filmed.
Yeah, and also probably meant to illustrate that you would rather run, at least in the movie, rather run than have them be arrested and taken away. Because obviously in real life this did not happen, but I did like this sort of change. I think it's also meant to motivate Joseph a little bit more.
The men, the conspirators, they must go into hiding. So they hide out under this church where they're being protected by the priest and his bishop. And actually the bishop ended up being killed for his role in this and became a martyr. And so they go into hiding under the church along with fellow parachutists who had dropped into the country at the same time as them with several different missions. And they're all waiting to be moved out again by the British, but it's not happening quickly enough. They later learn that Heydrich has died of his injuries. We know in real life that fragments from the grenade that Jan threw caused injuries to Heydrich's diaphragm, lung, spleen, and ribs. So he just got really fucked up from shrapnel, basically. He died of sepsis on June 4th, age 38. If you're keeping track, that means he died an agonizing death over 7 days, and he was a terrible person. So he's probably the only high-ranking Nazi that died the death he deserved. And in private, Hitler actually blamed Heydrich for his own death due to carelessness and arrogance, which,
of course, I don't know about you, but when they were going to hide in the church, I was like, can we trust this guy? Can we trust the clergy and everybody else? I was feeling very cagey when I went to the church, but it turned out okay.
Yeah, they did a good job. We see them meet the two guys at the beginning of the movie and quickly realize that they're German collaborators. And there's not a really obvious sign, but they figure it out and they kill them. And then, when they're going into Prague at the beginning of the movie and they realize that their original contact has been killed and they're, everybody's so suspicious of each other and you don't know who you can trust because the stakes are so incredibly high. You will be killed if you fuck this up. And so I think the movie did a really great job of making it so that even we're never sure like when they're safe or who they can trust.
Out of those two guys, they actually only killed one because Jan was too afraid to kill the other.
Right.
Which is another, throughout the movie, you're like, is he going to perform? Is he going to shoot? Is he not going to shoot? They made it really tense. But apparently this is one of the details that was not true. So, yeah, still good though. I really enjoyed it. Karel Korda, the missing conspirator, goes to the Nazis to rat out his fellow plotters in hopes of amnesty for his family. Oh man, this guy. I'm upset.
It's pretty rough because the Nazis have made an announcement saying that if you come forward, even if you didn't come forward before, then you and your family won't be punished for what the conspirators have done. And obviously this is not true. Churda comes forward and immediately starts getting tortured by the Nazis. They beat the shit out of him. And so, he's not having a good day, despite the fact that he came forward. And you understand why he did it, because, all these, these conspirators and their families are getting disappeared by the Gestapo and or executed in the street. So, but it's still like, come on, dude.
And also, I don't know, the movie made him kind of likable, but apparently in real life, he started out by saying he did it for the money. So it's a bit, they made him a little bit more likable than he was, I think.
The Nazis go at once to the safe house where Jan and Josef had been staying. Their hostess, who is this older lady named Marie Moravec, played by Elena Mihilova, kills herself with a cyanide pill. Man, it's such a sad scene. They're in there and she knows they're beating her and they're trying to get her to stay where the men are hiding. And she wets herself because she's afraid. And her son is also in the house, her teenage son and her husband. And so she asks them if she can go clean herself up. And then she uses that opportunity to kill herself. And unfortunately, this doesn't actually end up saving the conspirators, because the Nazis are able to torture their hiding place out of her son, Adam Moravec, played by Bill Milner. And that is also super fucking sad. He plays the violin and they're like smashing his fingers. They're showing him his mom's head in a box. It's a whole thing. And so the Nazis figure out where the men are hiding and they surround the church.
This apparently happened in real life too. They did show him her head floating in a fish tank. It's like really cruel. Like, these Nazis were particularly evil, I want to say.
I also read that apparently it was something like 800 Nazis surrounded the church. And the fact that there was only a small group of conspirators, I'm like, nothing else, does anything else say, Nazi, like, it's going to take 800 of us to take out this small group of people. Like, we're just going to, I don't know. It's just,
It's probably a show of force. Like, look at us being powerful and intimidating.
Right. It's like, congratulations, your 800 dudes can take out 8 dudes.
Yeah.
Right.
Upstairs, Jan and fellow conspirators Adolf Opaka, played by Harry Lloyd, and Josef Public, played by Sam Keeley, make a last stand. They put up a good fight, but they are eventually overrun and unfortunately all die.
Soon, the Germans also find the group hiding in the basement. So Jan and the other guys had been upstairs sort of keeping a watch, and they hold the Nazis off for as long as they can. But ultimately, there's too many of them. And so they find the group hiding in the basement. They attempt to flush them out. Literally, they can't come down into the basement because as soon as they try, the conspirators will obviously shoot them. And so they just start pumping it full of water to flood it. And earlier in the movie, someone had quoted Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. And the quote is, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once." And as these guys are making their last stand, we see a copy of Julius Caesar floating in the water. So I think it's meant to sort of conjure that up for us. Josef and the others save one bullet, and ultimately, when it's hopeless, they shoot themselves before they can be taken prisoner. And we know from real life, the conspirators actually killed 14 Germans and wounded 21 more. So it was quite the feat.
I already knew how this was going to end, and yet I'm watching the movie, rooting for these guys and hoping that one of them gets away. I know it's not going to happen, but you do hope for it. End cards show the names of the parachutists, and this is a quote. The 7 parachutists held the church for 6 hours. In direct retaliation for Heydrich's assassination, it is estimated that over 5,000 Czech men, women, and children were murdered by the SS. And more than 13,000 people were arrested in Georgia. Jan's girlfriend, Anna Malinova, died at Mauthausen concentration camp, as did many others.
Yeah, in the movie, we don't find out what happens to Marie, who is the fictionalized version of Anna, I guess. But yeah, she did not have a good ending either. And then we get another little end card that says, Reinhard Heydrich was considered to be the leading architect of the final solution to the Jewish question, and had set in motion the extermination of all European Jews. He was the highest-ranking Nazi ever to be assassinated during the war. After the bloody reprisals committed by the Nazis on Czech citizens, Winston Churchill declared the Munich Agreement null and void and counted Czechoslovakia as an important ally in the fight for freedom. And it is true that Churchill decided circa 1942 that the Munich Agreement would not be upheld after the war, and the Sudeten was indeed returned to Czechoslovakia.
Thank God for that. I mean, most of the people were dead.
Well, and they actually expelled the German population from the Sudeten. So
go away, Germans.
Yeah, it was quite the final scene, that's for sure.
Not very uplifting at all, but a good movie.
You know what? Obviously sad, but part of me did find it a little uplifting. And maybe it's the times that we're living in, but the idea that some people would decide that there are values worth laying down your life for, and there are things that are like more important than us that are worth fighting for. I kind of liked that message.
That's fair. And like, especially on the morning of the assassination, I don't think Jan or Josef expect to return at that point, so they were very ready to lay down their lives. I guess it would never be me. I'm too much of a scaredy cat, but I'm glad that there are people out there that weren't.
Let's talk about our notes.
We have some notes.
We do.
So the release of the movie prompted calls for gift and Kubis to be exhumed from the mass grave they were buried in, and to be given a burial befitting their status as resistance heroes. Do you know if this actually happened?
No, there's a memorial to them, but as far as I know, they did not get reburied.
It must also be really difficult to find them in a mass grave.
Right, exactly. I'm not sure we know precisely where they ended up. And part of that is for a reason, right? The Germans did a lot of that because if you don't know where somebody is, it's just extra difficult and brutal for everyone else.
Exactly. So Karl Korda, was given a new name, Karl Gerhard, by the Germans. He married a German woman, and he continued to collaborate with them. But he was hanged for treason in 1947. And another uplifting detail, out of all the people we see in the film, only one of them really survived the war. And that's the guy who was kind of hesitant about the whole assassination in the first place, but he survived by joining all his fellow resistance members and joining more of them in. His name was Ladislav Vaniak, and he died in 1993.
And they sort of make implications in that regard in the movie. That Joseph, the Cillian Murphy character, is suspicious. At one point, he directly calls out Vaniak, and he's like, why are you so insistent that we don't kill Heydrich? He basically implies that he is working with the Germans, and Vaniak is it, of course, the way you would.
Yeah, and then he also says, if I was working for the Germans, do you think you'd still all be here? So he's like, no, I'm not. And there's a scene in this where he and Uncle Hachi, or whatever his name is, I keep forgetting, they try and rescue the man from the church in a hearse, trying to, I think are going to imply that they've died and put them in coffins. But as they try and do that, the Germans and the SS have already surrounded the church, so they have to turn around. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Sam, tell me more about Reinhard Heydrich.
Listen, every Nazi was a bad Nazi, but Reinhard Heydrich might have been the worst fucking Nazi, y'all. Like, listen, if there was some kind of dubious award for worst Nazi, I think this man might win.
Yeah, so, this is what we mean when we talk about evil Nazis.
Yes. It's funny because we were talking about this a little bit offline, but so often in war movies, it's like they'll take a Nazi and like Nazis are just evil by themselves, but a movie will make a fictional Nazi who's just like the worst Nazi who ever lived. He's such a bad person. He does this. He's not only is he a Nazi, but he does all this other stuff. And it's like, you don't have to do that with Reinhard Heydrich because in real life, he was doing all kinds of terrible shit over just above and beyond being a regular Nazi.
I'm only laughing about it because it's so hurtful. I can only laugh.
He's the fucking worst and he died a terrible death. So at least there's that.
Yeah. Go on.
So I've mentioned this podcast before. It's called Behind the Bastards. They did a 2-part series on Reinhard Heydrich. And if you want to go into more detail on his life and find out what a scumbag he was, I definitely recommend that you listen to it. But the basic facts are that he was a diehard Nazi for careerist reasons, basically. He was a founding member of the Security Service, which was the intelligence arm of the SS, responsible for, quote-unquote, neutralizing opponents of the Nazi Party in Germany and later in Austria, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. He was the head of the SD starting in 1932 and orchestrated taking over the regular German police. He became head of the Gestapo in 1934. He helped to coordinate the Night of the Long Knives, which was when Hitler purged the Nazi Party of all of his political opponents and consolidated his power. Heydrich was also the reason why the Gestapo was so effective at terrorizing and keeping the populace in line, because he was really great at setting up spy networks. And he actually bought out the big brothel that was in Berlin, I believe. And he put in listening apparatuses, and he would send foreign diplomats who would come. He would be like, oh, hey, go there and give them my secret code word, and you'll get the deluxe service. And so they would give the secret code word, which would tell the lady who ran the brothel to turn on all the listening devices. So he would get dirt on all these foreign diplomats and his coworkers by sending them to this brothel. So this guy was if there was dirt on you, he could figure it out. And the Nacht und Nebel, which is the night and fog degree, basically meant that by 1940, anyone who was quote unquote endangering German security was being disappeared by Heydrich's SD. So my guy also organized the SS death squads, the Einsatzgruppen, who murdered over 2 million people as the German army advanced across Europe. He helped organize the false flag attack that provided the excuse for Germany to invade Poland. And then he set in motion the ethnic cleansing of the Polish population. So anyone who could conceivably be a Polish nationalist, they were getting rid of them. And they were traveling across the countryside, executing Jewish people, executing nationalists, executing whoever they came across. But they found it really time-consuming. If you have even the worst Nazi shooting people day in and day out, they start to find it a little distasteful and tiresome. So they were trying to figure out a better way for them to get rid of all the Jewish people and the other quote-unquote undesirables that they didn't want. So my guy was a big proponent of the original Nuremberg laws. He figured, look, regular, everyday Germans, they don't want to see street violence. But if we make all of these laws that basically remove citizenship from Jewish people, make it illegal for them to intermarry, make it difficult for them to own a business, all these racist, segregationist laws, they'll try and leave, and we can keep their wealth when they leave. So that's just a win-win for everybody. He helped organize Kristallnacht, which was the night when there was actually a Nazi official in France who had been assassinated. And so the Germans retaliated by rounding up a bunch of Jewish people in Germany, destroying Jewish businesses, terrorizing the Jewish population. And when this drew international backlash, Heydrich actually used it to advance his career by pushing his idea that street violence wouldn't adequately solve the quote-unquote Jewish problem. And where Hitler was an ideas guy, Heydrich was the logistics guy. Basically, Hitler would have all these grand plans, but he wouldn't really know how he was going to carry it out. And if you could figure out how to take that ideology and turn it into policy, you could be Hitler's best friend. And Heydrich was like, I can do that. I got this. So he volunteered to orchestrate the quote-unquote final solution. He reported only to Goering, Himmler, and Hitler. So right at the top, it was them and then this guy. He chaired the Wannsee conference where the plans were finalized. And this conference directly led to the creation of the death camp. So Heydrich is actually the reason why the Holocaust, as an organized genocide, was able to kill so many people.
I just need to sigh for a minute. It's so bad, guys. And I don't know if people realize that the Nuremberg laws were implemented as early as 1935. So even though the war hadn't begun yet, the war had begun.
Yeah.
It's just... And then there's the thing where the laws weren't actually enforced until after the Olympics in 1936, because obviously there wouldn't have been an Olympics if they'd done it before. So it's extra gross to me. It's just so gross. Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, this guy died a terrible death. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. And he's probably the only high-ranking Nazi that really got what he deserved. Because taking a week to die from sepsis sucks. So, you know what? It's great. We're happy about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Man, sometimes when you realize that people like this exist, you do need to remind yourself that people like the resistance fighters also exist. Because, my God, he was evil.
He was. And as terrible as it was that the Nazis cracked down and killed and imprisoned and tortured so many people in the wake of this happening, who knows what even worse, terrible shit this guy would have done if he had lived. I mean, in his 38 years of life, he was the architect of the Holocaust and did a bunch of other terrible shit. And well after his death, the concentration camps were killing millions of people. His brainchild was still hurting people. And so, yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, well, despite everything that happened, it's like, ultimately, it's probably good that this guy got fucking erased before he could do more damage.
Yeah, like, what would have happened if he'd gone to Paris? What would have happened to the French? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
And that is brutal. But still very interesting. So what I'll do is I'll link to these episodes on our websites as well. On our website, not on our Beyond the Run. What is the podcast called again?
Called Behind the Bastards, and it's about the worst people in all of history. And the host actually said that he thought that of all the terrible people they've ever covered on the podcast, that Reinhard Heydrich might be the worst.
That's a yearbook quote for you. It's horrible, but still very interesting. So like I said, I will link it on the website so you can all listen to it and learn about a terrible person and be glad that it's dead.
All right, well, let's rate this movie. Please Stop Dousing Us with Water out of 10. How many Please Stop Dousing Us with Waters out of 10 will you rate this movie?
Thanks for making me laugh at the end of the podcast.
Just the part where the Nazis are just pumping water into the basement of this church, and you're just like, yeah, I mean, this scene is like very sad, but also it's just like, just funny that they're like, how do we get these guys out of there? I don't know. Let's fill it with water.
And Cillian Murphy is looking up at it, like, just observing what is going on for a minute. He's like, oh, there's water coming in. Oh no. Like, for a second, he seems kind of frozen.
Yeah.
And then he sees Lenka in the water. Anyway, I'll rate this movie now, shall I?
Yeah.
I will rate this movie 8.3. Please Stop Dousing Us with Water out of 10. Because I really enjoyed it, even though it was kind of dark. I thought the pacing was good, the acting was phenomenal. Some things were a little bit extra heroic, specifically the death scenes of the guys in the church. Upstairs in the church was a bit long and maybe dragged out a bit. But it's one of those stories that doesn't really get told, I feel, in my part of the world, because it's not in the Netherlands or Germany or England or America. So it's quite nice to learn about this. And yeah, I can't really find anything I don't like about the movie. So that's why it gets this rating for me. How about you?
Yeah, actually, now that you say that, I'm just quietly laughing about the fact that in the movie, whenever there are Nazis around and they're speaking German and it's not subtitled, or my version wasn't subtitled. So
no, it just starts speaking in German, yeah.
Yeah, so you don't know what they're saying, as would be the case, I guess, if you were a Czechoslovak person who didn't speak German. But every time they're speaking, like, the Czech language, they're just speaking in English with an accent. Anyway, I'm just cracking up thinking about that now.
Yeah. And also there's two Irish guys playing Czech guys, which is also funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to give this movie 8.5. Please Stop Dousing Us with Waters out of 10. As I said before, I thought the acting was really strong. I think Cillian Murphy is just reliably good. If you see he's going to be in a movie, you're like, well, it's probably going to be pretty decent. As I said, too, I particularly liked the portion of the movie after the assassination happens, where, you know, they're having to go into hiding and it's very tense and they don't know who they can trust. And then they have this big standoff. I really liked that part of the movie. And yeah, and I also, as you said, I liked that it showed us part of history that I wouldn't necessarily have known about. I mean, I had, of course, listened to this other podcast before, but it was a podcast about Reinhard Heydrich. Like, I didn't know a lot about these two guys and like what had led to the assassination, and the fact that the Czechoslovak government in exile was still kind of pulling strings in this way. I didn't know that. And I also liked that this movie had a couple of female characters who are based on women from real life who did have something to do. So yeah, I would recommend this movie. I liked it.
That's really good. I feel like we've kind of righted our podcast about. Just for your information, guys, I watched a movie last week that we're not going to cover on the podcast because it's too disappointing.
I literally, Mark was like, oh, are you going to watch that? And we'll cover it on the podcast. I was like, I'm not going to watch it. You made it sound so terrible. I was like, I'm not doing that to myself. I can't face it.
I feel like maybe doing this podcast has made me extra critical of movies now. So it just makes you kind of dissect whatever you're watching a bit more. So maybe I'm harder to please.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Are you reading anything right now?
Am I reading anything? Can you guess what I'm reading?
Why don't you tell us?
I'm still reading.
Say it.
But to be fair, I'm about halfway through it now. Because, so what are you reading?
Oh, yeah, I'll talk about that. I'm actually reading 2 books right now. I was going to talk about the other one, but we'll talk about that one. I am reading Jib Show, a novel by Robert B. O'Connor. And the reason why I'm reading that is because we were reached out to possibly interview this author on the podcast, which is extremely exciting.
Yes, so when I finally finish that other book, I'm also going to read this book as fast as I know how to read, and then we can discuss it. And we'll let you know if it's good, guys.
Perfect. Well, you can follow us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars, or send an episode to a friend. Send this one to a friend just out of the blue. Don't even say anything. Just send it to them, perhaps with like a heart emoji or the party face emoji. You can also visit our website, rosiethereviewer.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. I think that's it.
Yep. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.